Hello everybody and welcome back to my sewing room. If you're new to my channel, my name is Diane and I like to share with you the stories of the quilts that I make. Now I've called this quilt the Nougat Quilt or Nugget, depending on how you like to pronounce it. So a Nougat bar is a pink and white narrow strip of candy. It's made from sugar and honey and egg whites, and it's usually in a sandwich, so you've usually got white and pink, and sometimes there's green pistachio nuts in, and it's really tasty. And I thought that I would go and collect one while I was at the shops this morning and show you what a nougat bar is. Unfortunately, they didn't have any in my shops. I don't eat sweets very often, but when I was making this is what it reminded me of, and so that's why I've called it that, and I wanted to share what one of those bars looked like. But apparently the shop owner said to me, "Oh, no, we don't stock them. You're talking retro sweets now." So I said I don't buy sweets very often, but I'm sure I've had one in recent times. So anyway, I haven't got one of those bars to share with you, but it's pink and white essentially. That's why I've called it that. That's what it reminded me of. And so this quilt came about because I've changed the way I make quilts. So not the way I actually put them together, but how many I make, because I used to just make one quilt at a time from start to finish, and then I'd move on to the next quilt. I used to buy fabric for that quilt, use it, and then buy fabric for the next quilt when I started that. But everything has changed in recent months. I've been buying fabric because I like it. So I'm not sure this is a good thing. I'm waiting for some more to come again today. I have bought some bargains. I think really that's why I did start to buy the fabric, because sometimes in the back of my mind I've got a quilt design that I think I want to make, but if I've seen fabric out, unless I was ready to start that quilt, I never bought the fabric, and then often I've gone back and the fabric's gone, or I couldn't find it again. And so I know there's a lot of quilts in the back of my mind that I intend to make, and so when I see fabric now, I've sort of got a plan of where they're going to go. Now, because of that different way of working, I need more space. So at the moment, I've got 6 quilts that I'm working on. Well, I've just finished the Nougat quilt, and on the board behind me, you can see there's a couple of images. I'll show you those close up. They are like a sort of Japanese themed fabric that Project Linus gave to me and said, "Can you make something with these?" So yes, that will be the next one. So I've just finished the Nougat. So my plan is to work on projects that take quite a while. So I'm working on the Prairie Queen, and that has a 3-inch block. It's a sort of churn dash, and these are the sides. So you need 4 of these smaller blocks, and then half square triangles and a solid in the centre. So that's time consuming. So that's one of the ones I'm working on. Another one, I think I'm going to call this Flower Bud, something like that. I haven't got a name for it yet, but this is another quilt that I'm working on, and it will be on point sort of. It's the start of a log cabin, but that's how it finishes. It's only a 3-inch block again, so I'm using that scraps. What I've sort of changed is, instead of cutting up scraps after I've finished a quilt and just putting all the scraps away, if I can, I'm going to make blocks with those scraps. So I have blue and white going on in that one. I have soft blue and soft pinks in this one. I also have another quilt I'm calling the Green Daisy, which is again 3-inch blocks, but in that one I've altered with a little cross, a square, and the other day I just fancied making something a little bit different. And I've sort of made a little flower like that. So that's all green and whites, green whites with a touch of yellow. It's really the colours that I'm using up. And then the fourth one, the smaller block, is an Irish chain, and again they're just over 1-inch squares, so they're finishing at just under 1 inch, so these will alternate. So I'm making a quilt of those. So those are all time-consuming quilts. And at the same time as working on these little small pieces, I'm working on a bigger quilt for myself, which at the moment is this one. And I do love this one. I'm not quite sure where this one's going to go, what life this one will lead, but it is beautiful. I really, really love this one. It's quite a big one. Got a little border on, and I'm just going to put another border on now. What held me up with this one was I wasn't sure how big I wanted to make it, and so I don't tend to make big quilts because it's, you know, a bit of hard work on the old shoulders. But if I'm working on other projects, I thought I could make this larger, and then I could do a little bit on this and go back. So I will now put another border around the edges of this in the same green that, well, it's a sort of aqua green with a touch of gold, that. So that's what that edge is going to be in. And I've got to measure it yet. I haven't decided on the size, but the batting I've ordered should be arriving today, and that's 72 inches by 90 inches. So that's a good size. So I'm thinking 6 projects on the go. Is that excessive? Is that enough? Is that not enough? How many do you use at the same time? How many are you working on? Like I say, it's all new to me, but I am enjoying working this way. I don't know whether I'll be as productive as I was, whether it's quicker or slower, because you know, they'll be finishing at different times. So back to the Nougat quilt. Anyway, the Nougat, the Nugget. After I've spoken to different people, I can't think of how to pronounce it. Nougat. I think that's how I always pronounced it. But anyway, the pink and white one is for Project Linus. And the reason I started making this quilt was because I needed extra space, because if I'm making all these different projects, I want to put material that will go into them. At the moment, you know, this little flower bud is living in this little tub, and the poor green one is living in that little tub. And this is the Prairie Queen. You know, for bird food, the fat balls. So I need more space, because I'm thinking I should put fabric aside for that as I come across it. And so I was looking through the drawers, and I had these little triangles, and I'd had them for quite a while. I made a quilt, a heart quilt for somebody, and they were the offcuts, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with them. They were pretty, and I trimmed them to 4 inches. And I'd also put some pieces of the pink that I'd used in the quilt aside, put those in the same drawer, because I thought when I do decide what to do with these half square triangles, that might come in useful. And so I took these out with the intention of making a quilt for Project Linus. Now I knew I had a piece of batting that I'd pieced. That was a Frankenstein batting, or something like that it's known as. So it was all pieced, so I knew there was enough batting for the quilt. And when I was at Project Linus the last time dropping off some quilts, I was gifted some fabric, and in that fabric bundle that I was given, along with these Japanese prints, there was a soft pink cotton sheet, and I thought that would make a lovely backing for a pink and white quilt. And I mentioned in one of my videos recently that Project Linus is celebrating its silver anniversary here in the UK. So in 2025, March of 2025, it's celebrating 25 years, and they've asked if we could produce some chevron quilts. And if I put all of these half square triangles together, then it does make a nice little chevron. Unfortunately, when I put those on the board, I was too short for that bottom row. You can just see on the right hand corner that I needed another 2 blocks, and so I used some of that scrappy pink fabric. I made a 4 3/4 inch square, and I had a square of 4 3/4 inches in white, and so I just put those together and I put a diagonal line across them. I sewed on each side of that line, cut that down the middle, and then I trimmed that to a 4-inch square. Unfortunately, if you have made half square triangles in that way and you have got directional stripes, you'll see that one of the stripes is going in the right direction and one is going in the wrong direction, the pieced parts. But I thought that's okay. You know, I'm not looking for perfection, and I still think that will make a beautiful top. However, there was another issue that I wasn't too keen on, and if you have a look at the top of the quilt, you can see there are white triangles with a point heading down, and if you have a look at the bottom of the quilt, you can see there are pink triangles with the point facing up. And I just thought I would prefer, if possible, to have white on the edges of the quilt. And so I took the bottom row of those half square triangles off and added them to the sides, the right hand side. And so now the quilt was wider than it was deep. So I just rotated that. So I think now, just by flipping it, you can see that these white half square triangles, the points are facing inwards, and that gives me a nice straight line on the edge to contrast with the borders that I intended to put on. Because at the moment the quilt wasn't big enough. I did make a note at that point it was 28.5 inches wide and 32 inches deep, which isn't big enough. And so the next thing I did was to make some 4-inch squares. I used all the bits of pink that I had, and I started making 4-inch squares, and I just thought I'd put like a little squared border all the way around the outside. But I didn't think that the contrast against the inner zigzag and the squared outer was great enough, and so I decided that I would look again in my fabric stash. And I had some of this lovely pink left in my stash, not a huge amount. I wanted to make a 4-inch border, so there was a nice balance with all these 4-inch blocks. However, I was a bit tight on whether I could manage that with the scrap that I had left. So I knew I was going to have to join that pink, but I wanted to join it as little as possible. And so the first thing I did was to put a strip across the top, and then I put a strip down each side. And so I did have to join the piece that came along the bottom, and there were 3 joins in that. But when it was all sewn together, I don't think that it's very noticeable, and you can just see how much I had left, that tiny scrap of pink. And I cut that up into a couple of 4-inch squares, and I used that in the border. And then I hit on the idea of having 2 rows of these squares, and on the inner row I would have the soft pink and a pale, or a soft pink and a purple. And I alternated those around the inner border of the quilt, and then on the outer border I alternated the soft pink with a deeper pink, and I did that all the way around the quilt, and I thought that looked nice. And the quilt now measured 49 inches by 53 inches. And that scrappy batting that I told you about earlier, I had put aside in a bag, and I'd left a little note on that, and it said scrappy batting 54 inches by 50 inches. So he gave me an inch each side to play with, which was a bit tight, but anyway, that's what I used and it worked out okay. And then I backed it in that very soft pink sheet that I had been given, and I sewed a crosshatch quilting. And here's a little close-up of the quilting and the blocks. You can see some of the small snippets of fabric that I've used in the chevron, and I think it looks really pretty. So that's it, nice and bright. Like I say, I'm calling that one the Nougat Quilt, and that's the second of the chevrons that I've made for Project Linus. I'll put those two quilts together with these three, and I've used up all of the labels that I have for Project Linus, so I need to take these 5 over there, pick up some more labels, and that's it for this week now. I'm running short on time. So if you're still with me, thank you very much for your company, and I hope you've enjoyed the way I've used up these scraps and it's given you some ideas, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.